Hello and welcome. I hope everyone's ready to have a cozy morning listening to our book talk. Um, Please keep yourself muted for the entirety of the program and only unmute at the end when we will have some time for Q&A. As all of you know here, I'm Renee Bronner-Pessin, daughter of Helen Colin Bronner from Olkush and Shulam Bronner from Benjamin. Everyone here today has deep ties to the Holocaust. The Fraternal Order of Benjamin Sosnowicher, or as many of you knew growing up, the Society, maintained a bond for our parents and grandparents, a bond to their past before the Shoah in Zaglembia, a bond to their shared experiences, and a bond to their will to live good lives after the horrors they witnessed. We are proud to continue the history today by presenting this book talk. This book has deep roots aligned with our stories and in our towns in Poland. Co-authors Aaron Hurt Mannheimer and Marty Urer met at a high school poker game. They soon discovered not only were they neighbors, but that both their parents were Holocaust survivors. Their stories and that of their families shows the breadth and diversity of socioeconomic and religious backgrounds that we all come from, and how our lived experiences growing up in the shadow of the Shoah were similar but different. Just a little bit about the authors. Aaron has been involved in writing about Jewish culture, history, and more for over 50 years. He was editor of Reform Judaism magazine from 1976 to 2014. He founded Dafka magazine in 1970. He is co-author of Jagendorf's Foundry, a memoir of the Romanian Holocaust, and also of Jews, the Essence and Character of a People. Elie Wiesel, who Aaron interviewed in 2005, described him as a writer possessed of a rare blend of integrity, persuasiveness, and good literary sense. For us, it's important to know that Aaron's father was from Benjamin, and his mother was from nearby, and I'll probably pronounce it wrong, Dabrova Gornicha. There are family roots in Olkush as well. Marty, who I'm meeting here for the first time today, also has roots in Benjamin. Marty moved to Israel in 1970 after graduating from UCLA, and he became an officer in the IDF. During the Yom Kippur War, he served as a field psychologist in the Golan Heights. He has worked as a psychologist, management consultant, and entrepreneur. In 2009, he and his wife founded Vista Yoga in Atlanta, where he teaches yoga and meditation. He also teaches yoga at a program for veterans with PTSD at Emory Healthcare, one of 4 such programs in the U.S. Marty's mother was from Sosnowiec. His father moved to Belgium as a young adult after serving in the Polish Army before World War II. Just one note about the book. When I saw the title that this book contained the words inherited trauma, I thought to myself, I don't want to hear analysis of how I was traumatized through my parents' experiences. But that is not the case here. Instead, this book deftly discusses the blessings and burdens of growing up as we did in the shadow of the Shoah. We must understand that though there may be inherited trauma, importantly, there is more so inherited love, and love outweighs the trauma. Okay, let's get started. Marty, you first. You and Aaron have been friends for over 60 years. Tell us a little bit about your friendship in high school and beyond, and how that led you both to write this book together. You're muted.
So you got the poker game right.
Okay.
I had just moved to Los Angeles from New York, from the Bronx, and one way that my parents thought would be good to assimilate there was to hang out with some survivor kids. So we ended up in this game, and from that evening on, we became fast friends. We spent our couple of years at UCLA together, taking the same classes, first apartment, we lived together. Um, and then we ended up in Israel together on the same program. And then there was a hiatus of several decades that we were very marginally in contact. And one event, um, kind of out of the blue, Aaron's daughter and her husband and toddler got stuck at the Atlanta airport on a Christmas Eve, and flights were canceled, and I became the hero and fetched them. And his daughter returned and confronted her dad. And how come you guys don't hang out more? Because their homes your homes are similar, your kids are similar, your tchotchkes are similar, and that sparked our reconnection. Um, I went to a Zen Peacemakers immersion retreat at Auschwitz-Birkenau in 2017. Came back from that, reached out to Aaron, wrote an article for Reform Judaism magazine, and a few months later, I said, I think I should write something about this, and you know about writing. Will you help me? And he said, well, why don't we do it together? And that sparked our deep dive of 6 years in writing, resulting in this Sons of Survivors book. So that's the fairly short version of several decades of relationship.
Yeah, that's amazing. Aaron, can you discuss your perspective of what it was like growing up in the survivor community in Ohio and then Los Angeles? And how did you see yourself compared to other kids?
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Renee, for setting this up. And it's such an honor for us to be speaking to our Lans people. Um, we come, we all grew up in a very special kind of community. Um, what I discovered, in my research is that uh, we were very isolated. The survivor community was kind of isolated. And the reason for that is when our parents came to this country, in the general experience, not everybody's, nobody wanted to hear their stories. Um, there were even Jewish people didn't want to hear. They were considered kind of damaged goods or suspected of having done something immoral or unethical or shameful in order to survive. Um, so the community kind of survivors turned inward and formed communities of mutual aid. And it was the same with the kids. All our friends were children of survivors. Something interesting happened, for my 70th birthday. I invited my my best friends, to come. And I realized for the first time that all of them had a parent who had been in Auschwitz. And it's not something we never talked about. And it was a revelation, just as it was a revelation that um, Marty and I, when we met, we knew that our parents had been in the Holocaust, but we didn't know the details. We never talked about it growing up in high school or in college. It was only when we sat down to start writing this book that we realized that both our fathers had been in Auschwitz, both our mothers had been in forced labor camps, uh, part of the Gross Rosen complex. Uh, and that Marty and I were both conceived in the same displaced persons camp, which was Feldafing. My mother had been in Fernwald before that, but then moved to Feldafing. And that's where I was born. Marty was conceived there. His mother was pregnant when they came to America, and he was born in New York. So that generally gives you the idea of this community that we grew up in and really tried to put behind us for a long time. And it wasn't until much later that we began to confront, uh, try to understand how being sons of survivors had impacted every stage of our lives. And this book goes through our lives through alternating stories. Marty tells a story, and I do, as we grow up through our lives, and always how the Holocaust, how this inherited trauma kind of was behind the scenes in many ways. And as Renee pointed out, this is in a way, a positive book because we didn't consider ourselves damaged goods in any way, or our parents. We considered them; they loved us so much, and we were surrounded by love, and that's part of the equation, a very important part of the equation, because you're not, even though your parents have gone through a terrible trauma, and maybe people have gone through their own trauma. Marty, being a soldier, in the Golan Heights, in the Yom Kippur War, all these traumas, they don't necessarily mean that you're walking wounded. There are ways to deal with it, and not necessarily by going to a therapist. So I hope that answers some of the question, Renee.
Mhm. This I'll ask of both of you. Um, how much and how did your parents talk to you about the Holocaust and their experiences?
Well, here's one of the marked distinctions between Aaron's household and my household. Uh, my parents virtually never spoke about any details. It was apparent it was apparent that our parents were survivors. We knew very well. I knew not much, um, and it was kind of a classic "don't ask, don't tell." We just didn't go there. There were hints. There was burdens. There were burdens. The first time any details surfaced were during the Eichmann trial, when we watched evening news with Jim McKay and the blow by blow reporting on the trial. And my mother began to disclose some stories, fairly innocuous stories. My father never said anything. Um, so there was a kind of a wall, didn't cross the line, and that's how it continued for several decades after that. And, I'll speak a little for Aaron. His parents were more disclosing, but the salient point here of what we learned, it didn't make much of a difference what the uh, whether they told us or whether they didn't tell us. At the end of the day, the whole dynamic of this inherited trauma, and I think, and I want to reiterate, this is a pretty unique opportunity. And we've spoken in front of a few crowds, but there's this background of relatedness that we all share. And so it's an a priori thankfulness for the graciousness of your listening, because we don't have opportunities like this. The common denominator of everyone going back to the roots of these two towns is unique as far as who we're exposed to and who we get to interact with. So that shared background of relatedness, we it has become apparent there is no immunity to that transfer of trauma. How it was experienced was different, but that the load that our parents carried, and as a generation, it always seemed extraordinary to me how much they were able to turn and look forward and proceed with their lives. Whether they were disclosing or not, did not stop for lack of a better term, that transfer, that intergenerational rolling down of the nervous system trauma that we kind of were weaned on. So, you know, Aaron's parents told him, my parents didn't make a hoot of a difference.
I would add to that I only realized later that although it was my impression that my parents were always talking about it, in fact, um, they told me very little. And I realized only by doing this project that I had never spoken to my father about the Holocaust. Never, not one time. And I didn't realize that till now. I asked my mother not long ago. My mother is 105 and living in Los Angeles, and we talk frequently. Not long ago, I asked her, did you ever consider not telling us about the Holocaust? And she said, never. You needed to know the truth. Otherwise, how could you ever understand the suffering that your dad and I went through? So it was their intention to tell, but I knew very little. And in fact, um, I've edited Elie Wiesel. Uh, I was the editor of the Holocaust Library, which published books about the Holocaust when no commercial publisher would touch the subject. I wrote a book about the Romanian Holocaust, many stories, many articles in the magazine, and yet I always kept my own family story at a distance. Uh, I only realize now how I wanted to know, but I didn't want to know. I had a memoir that there was only one other survivor in the family beside my father, one brother. He had four brothers and four sisters. And that one survivor moved to Argentina. He wrote a memoir in 1962. He gave it to me in 1968 in Buenos Aires. It was written in Yiddish under a pseudonym. He said, I'd like you to translate this. 50 years later, until we did this book, I never had it translated. And I learned so much about what happened in Bendin and what happened to our family because he wrote it all down. And yet I had it so close, and yet I didn't, it just collected dust. So one of my big revelations in doing this, and I think it's so important, for us to do this memoir, it gave us an opportunity to begin to really look into our parents' lives and how it affected us in ways that we had never done. It was not Marty's kind of topic, it was mine, and yet this is the first time we really looked at it closely. And the beauty of doing this joint memoir is that we had each other to lean on. And every time there was a revelation about what we learned in our research or how it impacted us, we would call each other and talk about it. And that, that helped us get through it. Just like during the Holocaust, my mother had a friend who she went through the whole Holocaust from Sosnovitz. They were in the same bunk, shared a bunk in Greenberg concentration camp. And they were on the death march together. And they escaped at the last minute together. It's recorded in the book. To have somebody to go through trauma with is a very important thing. And I had Marty, and Marty had me. And this book is a testament to our friendship and the story of two people going through it together.
Aaron, I'll just ask one follow-on that I hadn't thought of. Your father had lots of physical injuries that plagued him the rest of his life. Did that make you want to ask questions and you didn't, or you just thought that's just how your dad is and
That made me not want to ask questions because when I saw his body, well, he had an Auschwitz number on his left arm. Uh, he had uh, he had scars from bullets that went through his chest, through his back and chest when he jumped off a train and was shot through the chest. He had a blue mark on a knuckle where he was beaten by a capo continuously. And there was a big part of his back that was missing because he had ribs removed for surgery for tuberculosis before they had any cure, any antibiotics for it. So his body told it all. And, I didn't have, I think that's why I had Rahmanis. Why should I ask him about what happened to him when it was so obvious to me? I mean, I knew how he got those injuries. I knew how that happened. And even in Cleveland, he had another bout of tuberculosis and was in a sanitarium for 2 years when I was a little boy. So, it continued. It went on. Some, as Marty said, it doesn't matter how much they tell you or they don't tell you. That is not a factor in whether you're going to come out better or worse yourself. You know that so so that's the answer, and that's why I didn't speak to him. Interestingly, I learned a lot because when people did ask him, he did talk, and mostly to my brother-in-law and sometimes to my sister. So, but I realized I didn't ask. It's not that he wouldn't have talked to me about it. I just didn't ask, and he didn't tell, as Marty said.
Mhm. Okay, Aaron, how has inherited or intergenerational trauma manifested itself for you at different stages of your life? And here, maybe you can read an excerpt from the book that we talked about.
Okay. Um, well, my earliest memory is wanting to be an Avenger and to kill Hitler. So that was this idea that terrible things happen to my family, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to get the people who did this. Um, because we lived in this kind of isolated Yiddish community, we had very little contact with non-Jews. When we did, the question, I would look at the person, and the question in my head was always, can I trust that person? Because there was this whole question of trust. Who can you trust after what happened? Would this person hide me in their cellar if there was another Holocaust? Um, as a as a grandfather, I had this experience. We always have Shabbat here at our home, and we're fortunate to have uh, two of our kids live here in Richfield, Connecticut. And every Friday night we get together for Shabbat with my kids and grandkids. And on one of those Shabbats, I looked across the table. I don't know what triggered it. Uh, the candles were lit. The, the light was reflecting on on everybody. And I looked into the sparkle of my grandchildren's eyes. And suddenly I thought, 1.5 million children, just like them, could have been them, were murdered just because they were Jewish. It was a terrible feeling. Uh, Sometimes joyful moments trigger these things, you know. Um, and then I just got over it. I mean, I didn't say anything. I just got over it, and we continued with the evening. So these things, you don't know when they're going to come out of you, these feelings, but they're there. This The anger is there, the sorrow is there, even the fear uh, that everything can be taken away from you in a moment. That's very much part of it. I think the story that Renee wanted me to read. So I had an opportunity to go to Bendine, and it wasn't intentional. Just, and I won't go into all the how it happened for the sake of time, but something happened, and I was invited to go on a press tour to Poland because Poland, after the fall of communism, was interested in generating revenue through tourism, and they felt that Jews would be great tourists to come back and see Poland. So they sponsored a press tour, and I said I would go on it if we could stop in Bendine. And they said, yes, we can stop in Bendine because we're going to Auschwitz and it's only about 20 minutes away. It's on the road, so we'll stop in Bendine. And that was my condition for going on this press tour. Um, our van drove, and I had a little map of where my father's family lived, right next to the train station, the building right next to the train station in Bendine. And I got this map at a bar mitzvah 3 weeks earlier, where two survivors from Bendine approached me and asked me if I was ever planning to go to Bendine. I said, not really. And they were a little upset. So I said, well, maybe, not knowing that I would be invited 3 weeks later. Could you draw me a little map? And he took out his business card and I drew the map, and it was in my pocket when I arrived in Bendine. I looked at the building, and it didn't really, I didn't get an emotional charge out of it. It was just a building. But what happened is when the groups, I wanted to go see the Jewish cemetery. Nobody knew where it was. So we started walking down Malachowski Street, the main street. And so this is what happened to me. As we continued walking along Malachowski Street, a thought popped into my head. What if Hitler had not rechanneled the course of history? My parents would have been married in Bendine. I would have grown up in this place. Suddenly, the imaginary number lifted from my arm. For the first time in my life, at age 47, I was able to liberate myself from an identity that was not rightfully mine. What had happened to my parents during the war had not happened to me. So my takeaway was that I had, even then, middle age, had not detached. I'd not been able to emotionally detach myself to what happened to them. It felt like it happened to me. And that was the realization, but it was a liberating moment. And so when I came home, I had about 600 books on the Holocaust, and I donated them all to my shul because, okay, it didn't happen to me. I could kind of relax, but of course that didn't really happen. I didn't totally relax, and I kept writing about the Holocaust. Um, but I think that these are from childhood through grandparent and in between. These are some of the ways that the trauma expressed itself in my life.
Okay, Marty and Aaron, you wrote that during the 6 years it took you to complete the book, you uncovered many painful truths. Tell us what revelations most surprised you about yourself in the process of writing this book.
Uh, I think everything for me, it wasn't a matter of the revelation of facts. I think it was the process that demanded the willingness to delve deeper, to look, to ask the questions that we uh, avoided asking throughout our entire lives. And the culminate, and again, to emphasize the how much we leaned on one another, that this would not have turned out uh, in any way like it turned out, absent the partnership, absent the support structure that we provided for one another. Despite the extraordinariness of our families and our wives, it was, in the cave together, in the darkness together. So the thing that I was most um, hardest thing to do was to allow for the emotions. And everyone has their own ways of avoiding sticking their finger in a light socket. But that was part of we knew that's what we were doing. We were sticking our fingers in those sockets, knowing that there was going to be some un, unwanted response to that. And at the end of the day, what I kind of owned up for myself is after my whole life of form of kind of invalidation of being emotional about things related to the Holocaust and things related to humanity. So it's not limited to the Holocaust. It was very uncomfortable and very hard to reconcile for myself how emotional I got. I'm a big boy, I'm a street kid from the Bronx, did whatever I did, I've been around the block, but I was still not immune to being thrown off and being just kind of losing it. Several, not to the extent that it hampered my life, but it was for me it was a problem. And what I got learned to embrace, that's who I am. I allowed for my own humanity, for my own emotionalism, for my own mushiness, and did not resist that any longer. And it doesn't mean that I don't get mushy. I get mushy all the time, but I don't have that same embarrassment with myself for experiencing that. And that was a huge opening for me, a huge permission to be myself, to not stuff it.
Well, Marty, it was easy for him to cry, and especially around Yom Kippur, because it was a double trauma there. There was Yom Kippur reminded him of all the losses of the history of the Jews and the synagogues that we lost and all that. But he also experienced the trauma of fighting in a war to defend Israel when it was attacked in 73. So Yom Kippur was a time when Marty was particularly vulnerable, and you just couldn't even talk to him. He was just in a dark place. We went through several Yom Kippurs together, writing this book over 6 years, and much has changed in his relationship to Yom Kippur. On one of those Yom Kippurs, I had an opposite problem. My problem is I couldn't cry. I didn't cry at my father's funeral. I read the eulogy that I wrote for him. But on one Yom Kippur, while we were working on the book, I pulled out the eulogy from a file that I hadn't read in like 40 years. And I read it and I cried. It was a very delayed reaction. I think working on this book opened me up to that, because I always felt the more I knew, intellectually, cognitively, it would, that's how I dealt with the emotion. I kept it down. I called Marty. He had just come back from he had taken a walk. He was on that Yom Kippur. I called him in the afternoon and I said, I just read, can I read you the eulogy? And I read it to him, and he cried and I cried. And it was a big breakthrough for me, to realize, finally that, I'm not a cold-hearted person. I feel things, but we all react in different ways. And suddenly, I was always afraid, it's this idea that, if you open yourself up to the crying and tears, the well is so deep. When will you ever even stop? Don't even start. But I managed to cry. It didn't overwhelm me. And so from an emotional point of view, that was a great revelation. And the two of us accept the fact that we're very different in how we react to frightening, horrible things that are going on all the time.
Well, I think you kind of answered my next question, so I'm going to move on. Aaron, you write that despite all the hatred they endured, or perhaps because of it, your parents impressed upon you and your sister that goodness will ultimately prevail over evil. As your mother put it, no bad person wins in the end. What did Hitler achieve? You and I have previously discussed how soon after the Shoah there was the conspiracy of silence, and you mentioned it here, and that survivors were seen as damaged goods. How can the narrative change? For instance, maybe you can talk about how your mother was celebrated as a hero in 1995.
Yeah, our the stories we tell about ourselves can change. Part of doing a memoir is to look at your life and challenge the way you've always thought about things. My mother always thought about herself as a victim, um, humiliated, uh, tortured. She never wanted to go back to Europe ever. But suddenly, 50 years after her liberation, in 1995, uh, she received a letter from the mayor of the town of Volari in the Czech Republic, where the death march that she was on ended and where the Holocaust ended for her. She didn't want to go, uh, but my sister and I said, "If we go with you, would you go?" And she said yes. So we went with her. And in that, during the 3 or 4 days that we were in Volari, the 23 women survivors of that death march who were there from all over the world, they were regaled as heroes. They were given the key to the city, fireworks, concerts. The children of the town brought them gifts. And suddenly, from, from victim, she became hero. And it changed the way she saw her experience of the Holocaust in some ways. And said to my sister, I'm handing it off to you now because I've made peace with it. So I you know, I think you can change the way you view your life. So in my case, it's always been, I didn't walk into it willingly in terms of my own family story. That invitation came out of the blue. And it was a tremendous revelation to actually be with these women and hear the story, the fuller story of the little that I knew about the Death March. Um, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's where my mind went.
I think so. I think so. I just do want to. Is there anything to address in how your parents still persevered in thinking that um, ultimately good will prevail and no bad person wins in the end? Do you think that was related to all of that?
Not to that, I think that my mother, my mother told me that when in 1939, when the Nazis occupied Dombrava and all the towns and burned down the synagogues and started killing people. Her mother said to her, "There's one thing, things are never going to be the same. There's one thing you need to know, and that's this: whatever any bad thing that anyone does to you, don't do it back. Don't do it back to them because two bad things don't make a good thing." That was She went into the concentration camps and the death march with her mother's voice there, just telling her not to hate, not to be hateful, to remember the good, because bad things always end up, what did Hitler achieve? My mother later would say. And the other thing is, when I asked my mother, why do you think you survived? She said, because my father was a tzaddik. He was righteous. Uh, every Shabbos, he brought a poor person. He would look for a stranger in town or a poor person and bring them home for Shabbat. And he told me that the only important thing in life is to have a good name. So she said, because of his righteousness and because of his good name, that's why I survived. And that's why I'm still surviving. It was a gift, because goodness pays off. So she was imbued by those ideas from her parents. That is our people's message for humanity, that people can be redeemed. So we have a place in the world as Jews. She learned that very deeply and passed it on to us. And it's what gave her the courage to survive and start over again and give humanity another chance.
Thank you. Marty, I'm going to have you conclude for us, if you will, by reading an excerpt to the last two paragraphs from the book, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Okay. I am in awe of my parents and of other survivors who express no desire for revenge against Germans or others complicit in the genocidal crimes perpetrated against them. The words of poet Ian Thomas come to mind. Be soft. Do not let the world make you hard. Do not let the pain make you hate. Do not let the bitterness steal your sweetness. Take pride that even though the rest of the world may disagree, you still believe it to be a beautiful place. Our parents mastered the art of living with trauma through their love for each other and for their children. Though Aaron and I inherited the pain and sorrow they lived with, we and our children are also heirs to their qualities of love, kindness, and compassion.
Thank you very much. And at this point, we will open it for Q&A. You can either raise your hand or orderly unmute yourself and ask questions. And Shanna, you can help me with this, hopefully. Excuse me. Does anyone have any questions? A group of Jews and no questions? Impossible. Sam, can you unmute yourself?
I'm curious when you talk about trust and non-Jews and the community that you were in. My parents were very afraid of, non-Jews and intermarriage, and both of my children have intermarried. And they had this sense that there were couples who sort of betrayed their spouses. I'm wondering, do you guys have any stories or insights into those types of stories or those fears about intermarriage and betrayal by spouses down the line and stuff? Because I understand some of this did happen in Poland among our communities.
I would say my mother clearly, used to believe that. She she used to believe that no one who is not Jewish could ever be Jewish. Uh, and ultimately, everybody always tells the story. They all have a story about how somebody married a Christian, and then, when push came to shove, it was, I'm out of here. So that's a very common story among survivors, and I've heard it. Now, it turns out in my family that one of my sons married a woman from Africa because he was doing a lot of humanitarian work in Ghana, and he fell in love with a woman. And he said to her, um, and it's a tribal society. And he said to her, I'd like to marry you, but there's a condition. You'll have to join my tribe. And she agreed to that quite readily. And then he wrote a letter to my mother explaining to her what he was doing. Because he knew that she would be opposed to such a thing. So he wanted to explain, his feelings for the woman, and that, and that it would be okay. Um, they came back, then they came back to the States, and she officially converted with our rabbi in Westport, Connecticut, where we were members. I went to the mikveh, and has made, has raised her children as Jews, and wears a Jewish star all the time, and has been very faithful to her decision. My daughter married a man from Maine. Uh, the rabbi, our rabbi here in Ridgefield, at the time said, "I'd be willing to perform an interfaith marriage on condition that the children, that the husband, the groom, agrees to raise the children as Jews." And he agreed. And a year later, he came to me and he said, "I'm thinking of converting to Judaism. Um, I'm not a believer, but it means so much to your daughter, to my wife, And I don't, and our kids, I don't want to be of a different faith than my wife and my children. And he converted, and he has been very loyal to our people as well. And my third child married a woman who's Jewish and raised as a Jew. So all my grandkids are getting Jewish educations. All my grandkids go to Jewish camps. And, in our case, it's almost, a poster child for Jewish outreach. In that sense, I feel I'm very fortunate that we've all been able to keep the Jews going, in our family. Uh, I don't think that is the norm. I think, from what I hear, mostly, and it didn't even matter. It mattered to us, but it was not like you can't do it. Our generation is not like that. It wouldn't matter even if we said you can't do it. Um, so I don't think in our generation there's a distrust of people who are not Jewish, as was our parents. And I think there's an acceptance of people choosing to marry whoever they're going to marry and make their own decisions. As a result, there are going to be many fewer Jews.
Thank you.
Jeff Zimbler, I saw you had a question.
Yes. Hello, Renee and Aaron, and nice to see you, Aaron.
Yes,
As far as I know, your mother is the oldest living Zagwembe area survivor. Could you tell us what her life is like today, both physically and mentally and emotionally?
yes. Jeff, first of all, I want to thank you for being on the call. There's no one who is more devoted to keeping alive the memory of the people of this community and protecting the cemeteries, and the work you do is extraordinary. And I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you, Aaron.
My mother, uh, she's a force of nature. I didn't know she's the oldest Zaglembia survivor in LA. She's 105. She'll be 106 in June. Her latest checkup, the doctor said that she has the blood work of a 40-year-old. She's of sound mind. She's beginning to be a little forgetful and keeping track of the days and this sort of thing. She is she's still full of love for her family. She says it's because of my family, that I stay alive, that I want to be alive, to Shep Nachas. She lives in her own house. She has a caregiver, shifts of caregivers. So she always has one caregiver there. But she's able to live in her own house. She's got her wits about her. She still is very good at worrying about everything. I think that's worrying is what keeps her going. And chocolate. She, she's still very, she's in touch with what's going on in the world. On October 7th, she called me immediately, say it will be, she was worried about Israel. Will this be the end? I assured her it's not going to be the end of Israel. But at that point, she stopped going to Cafe Europa, which is the organization of the survivors. It's still going on in Los Angeles. And she said, I'm not going to go to Cafe Europa. I said, why? She said, because I can't dance now after what has happened in Israel while this is going on. So she's still an inspiration to me and my sister. She's very proud of the book and gives it to everybody. She's our best PR person. So we're all very proud of her, and biz hinten 20.
And I will just say Hannah's mother is not far behind. How old is your mom, Hannah?
Yes. So my mom will be 104 in March. Thank God. And she's also in good health, as her memory fails her at times, but she remembers very
My hand is frozen. I just want to say I wish both Hannah's mom and um um
Ever.
Aaron's mom long life till 120. And the beautiful thing is that not only do they have two beautiful children, but they both are living at home. That is wonderful.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Renee,
Mhm.
can you provide contact information for both authors, either, via email or
It is,
um,
they have a website. Is it sonsofsurvivors.com or .org?
.com,
.com.
sonsofsurvivors.com. There's contact information and a lot about the book.
okay, so do you do in-person speaking or is it just on Zoom or depending on the location?
No, we do.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, we do. If you have a group
I
uh,
do?
for your congregation that would like to have maybe one of us, because we live in different parts of the country, um, we could talk about doing that. Yeah.
I will reach out to you also because I was interested and I don't want to take up time. Does your mother have any recollection of the short time that she was in fail involved? Or she doesn't really talk about it?
I'd have to ask her about it because I think she spent most of the time. I think that's the first DP camp she was at, but I think maybe for a short period of time she probably wouldn't know too much about it, but you never know.
Okay, I'd be interested. We actually have a group with a lot of pictures, but anyway, I'll reach out to you via email or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Uh, Rabbi? You're muted, sorry.
Unmute. I had forgotten about it, but I remember that I also had those feelings about wanting to seek revenge, to go over to Germany and just randomly machine gun people, men, women, children, just an overwhelming feeling. I don't remember when I had the feeling, but and then it went away. I don't remember thinking about it until you spoke about it again this morning. And how did your feelings about that go away? Did they ever go away? Do you ever think about that from time to time? I remember thinking it was a dishonorable thing for me not to avenge my family.
Yeah, I don't think it persisted, but I think it was, you know, Marty as a young boy had this, notion that he was going to from a plane, drop glass on Germany. Okay. And my sister had this dream that they captured Hitler and they put him in a big glass container, huge, like the size of a building, with ladders on the sides, and people could go up the ladders and spit down at him until he drowns.
Oh.
So you know, that shows you kind of like just thinking about this. I think it's a normal reaction to want to take revenge. I grew out of it, uh, but there are times when I do feel such rage when certain things happen. So against people, inhumane things that that I sometimes feel that, but I'm essentially not a warrior. I'm essentially a peacemaker. So I know I repress those kind of thoughts, but I think it's very very natural for people to the animal part of our brain to be stimulated at times.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing that.
Steve?
Yes, it's more a statement than a question. Um, one of life's regrets, mine, we all have life's regrets, is not really responding to my father's call over the years. If only we could write a book, he said. And I never did what the two of you have done. And I revel and I marvel in it, and I thank you.
Thank you, Steve, and I agree.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Otherwise, I thank you all for joining. And I thank Aaron and Marty for making the time to talk to us. It was especially important to us to hear landsmen like you talking to us. Is very important to us, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the book. So everyone, make sure you go out and buy the book. It is a very good read, and I thought a very quick read too. It is like a conversation between Aaron and Marty, as he said. And then I think we're at Hannah. Do you have anything you want to say while we have this audience?
No, I really very much appreciate both of you coming to talk to us today. As Renee said, it's very important to have somebody with a common background and common geography speak to us, because we all have this implicit understanding of each other. So thank you so much, and I look forward to reading the book.
Yep. Sam, did you want to say something?
Yes, and I'm not an author, so I couldn't write a book either, but I am trying to prepare myself and to give talks to schools and other groups. So that's something else some of us can do, maybe who can't write.
There are a few of us on FOBS who do that. So if you want any feedback or anything, let us know. I do that. Jerry Zaks does that. So there are a few of us you could get in touch with about that.
Thank you.
Aaron, is your email still the SBS Global?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to send you an email. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, I think it was perfect. It was an hour. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we will post the recording on our website. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you all.
everybody.
Thank you.